Hi, listeners. It's Stephanie Ricca here with a quick note before we get started. Hotel News Now is changing its name to CoStar News, so our podcast name will change too in the coming weeks. Same smart reporting, same hosts, the great guests you've come to expect from us, just a new name that reflects our overall branding change from Hotel News Now to CoStar News. You don't have to do a thing. Just keep listening and we'll take care of the rest. Thanks for sticking with us. Now let's get into today's episode.
Hi, everybody. Sean McCracken, news editor for CoStar News Hotels. Here's with STR's Jesper Palmqvist. Jesper, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Sean. I'm coming in from a little bit different climate this time. I'm actually in Sweden after a trip to our lovely office in Nashville. So jumping around a bit during
It
July.
seems like you've been everywhere other than Asia Pacific. So it's a bit ironic for today's podcast, right?
I thought you were going to say you've been everywhere but Cleveland, but that's
Wow.
also true.
You're welcome. You're welcome to stop by Cleveland anytime you want. Although, if anything, the weather's been too hot here lately. We had about one day with normal temperatures. The rest of the week's been in the 90s, which we are not used to around the Great Lakes.
For sure.
So, since neither of us are in Asia Pacific, I will still ask you anyway. What's the news around Asia Pacific region this month? What should our listeners know? What's the top headline in your mind?
Yeah, no, when you have a quick look, sometimes it's hard to separate what's happening politically in all these countries and what happens and how that impacts obviously is different in each location, how it impacts tourism and travel and hotel investment and development. But of course, it's hard to ignore movements across, for instance, Thailand and Cambodia recently, unfortunate events, and also in Japan politically. But below that and behind that, we have some movements around it. I think definitely what will get attention both for hotels and politically is going to be the Thailand as one of the main headliners now for sure.
So let's start with that. I mean, obviously, we talked a bit about Thailand last month. The things we would worried about there have not gotten better. What's your general point of view on Thailand? Do you think that obviously it's got a long history of tourism there? How much more of this can the tourism industry kind of take before it becomes a real problem?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously it's a bit of a double whammy when, like we said, Q2 last month and how that paced out. And that's obviously continued into July. So even now in July, normally things pick up on resorts. And even if it does, it's still well behind last year, like in demand, being say 10% behind in occupancy. So it follows, I suppose, if there's any positive thing, is that it still follows the seasonality. It's just at a lower impact, which has to do with the source markets. Now, when you go in and look at it, with the impact of what's happening across the border with Cambodia, it's hard to see any impact very quickly because the booking window depends on where you are. And this is now hitting low season had just ended, and then you have the big low season coming in, say, during the rainy season, a couple of months here, August, September. It's really how will this impact peak season and all the snowbirds coming in during December to February. And if we've done this before, when you rank impact on a market, things like political or war or military impact will usually be quite strong. So I think it's definitely something to track on the forward-looking data that we have. I think that's something to look in the next month or so and how it impacts. We have not seen, maybe some will write sensationalist headlines about, we have not seen a massive drop-off in that. Maybe that's visible in search, but that's obviously not booking. But I think when you come through a period when I think it's going to impact how budgeting is being done now, both by local and smaller brands and global brands into 26, because that was always 26 is going to be it had the potential to be a little bit better, but very slow growth over 25. But
Hmm.
this could impact that whole setup as well. Because I mean, Bangkok is, I mean, June was down on both metrics and Phuket as well over last year. But it's true, 24 was pretty strong in growth. So, but even in actual terms, historical terms of where performance should be, it's kind of low. So I think there's definitely a warning signal that we haven't seen in a while that is a bit more serious, looking
Hmm.
into say Q4.
Yeah. So different types of headlines in Japan. Obviously, the news there was kind of framed around um, an election that saw a different party take more power, but not necessarily a regime change there. Um, what do you make of kind of the political rumblings in Japan, and how might that impact either the travel or business environment there?
Yeah, I suppose you could say when a domestic first, as it's been written, kind of partially populist agenda that comes through, and it was to be expected in one way when you have so much of this inbound tourism that keeps growing. Now that new hotel supply slowed down, as we've said in the past, it's about how tourists spread and travel around the country. And I
Hmm.
think for me, that's definitely different from the Thai example because it
Yeah.
is a domestic agenda, and to create policies that impact and decrease and impacts tourism in a negative way. I don't see that yet.
Yeah.
Hotel prices, obviously, what's happening in the market, we're seeing that ADR growth is slowly growing down, right? It's slowly
Hmm.
abating a bit. But I mean, the occupancy growth was already low coming into in the middle of summer. It's hot. It come out of the rainy season. It's hot there as well, of course, this time of year. But as ADR growth's gone down, we expected that as well. So I think our forecast still holds up quite well. That the second half of the year is where large Japanese markets will slowing down in their growth pace, but sit at unprecedented levels. Right, the fact that they
Hmm.
have and pretty good productivity too. We know that their margins have stabilized in a lot of hotels, and so it's so much more about the how they manage the hotels and operationally into the next 18 months. I think to capture all this revenue in a solid way because it's just so much higher rates in general, right?
Yeah. I mean, slow growth in Japan probably isn't the worst thing after the period they've seen so far, right? It's slow growth off a high base, right?
Yeah, and I think that's it. And you compare it. I mean, at a national level, you're seeing occupancy levels year to date in mid above mid 70s. So if occupancy levels are close to 80 and you have higher ADRs than you ever had in yen, then clearly that's a good baseline. I think it's about the secondary markets, tertiary, how domestic travel, which still, it's not a forgotten number. With all these arrivals, it's easy to forget about it. But the business travel around Japan has shifted so much that when you need to drill past that to see how what has impacted between Nagoya, Fukuoka, and the other cities that are adding more international brands, right? They're adding hotels that they didn't have. But I still feel just like many other markets around, we talked about India and Indonesia and Malaysia, where it is that gradual maturing process that was just accelerated in Japan.
Hmm.
And even though they have good hotels, but they are very domestic driven.
Yeah.
And to shift that for these inbound travelers, it needs to be something else. And that's happening. And that's not a bad thing. I think generally it will serve domestic customers well too across the entire country. So that development cycle that we've gone through, something that they will reap off in the rest of the decade for sure.
Hmm. So you mentioned that there's a couple other countries or destinations you wanted to check in on. What else do we need to know across Asia Pacific?
Well, I mean, we've been tracking both obviously China and New Zealand, who was China's still tight, right? So I'm keep looking
Hmm.
for those signs, and you'll have the occasional cities that we talked about last month, and some of them are picking up a little bit, but it is tight. It's still very tight. Like we're still waiting on a turnaround in terms of the economy. and the results, as you will have seen in earnings reports from major groups, both domestic and international, they're not seeing the same spend and the same volumes coming through. And I think New Zealand was the other market where it's slowly creeping up to start to see some positive growth, which we expected. So coming through winter there and into spring, I think hopefully then in key markets, even though like in the last month, Auckland is still under pressure, right? That's going to be the market. We're waiting on the other markets to do it, but Auckland in June and into July was still a couple of points behind. We've been tracking Malaysia a fair bit to see, again, that market that was reinventing itself more broadly. When we saw good growth, but that was 12 months ago. So the actual levels are starting to be okay. And we are at that kind of low point, inflection point now. What's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months? Because the growth is close to flat. So I personally, I think that's probably where we'll stay. We might see a couple of negative spikes down because of high performance last year. But again, it's not the end of the world. Well, you found that space, and there was a lot of new inventory released as well. So I do keep track of that. And then you have other markets that are have that stability, that keep running, like your Australia, your India for sure as well. You can have a week here and there, it goes up and down, but broadly at large country level, they perform quite well. We're starting to see in Korea that the occupancy growth is dropping down. It's almost at zero, so that's dropping down a bit. But on the plus side, Vietnam is still a market that keeps growing, but that is, of course, because they didn't have that growth earlier. So year over year is tricky. Month to month is tricky. So I spend more time kind of looking at the actual levels and how the flow through in hotels, and because obviously when people are investing and look at hotels there, they want to see how it does over the next 5-10 years. And it's still a very good market for people getting into.
So to jump back to China just for a minute, because this is obviously top of mind for me after listening to the Wyndham earnings call. To tell our listeners that we're recording this on Friday morning, July 25th. So yesterday morning for me, I listened to the Wyndham's earning call, and one of the big talking points for them was kind of plans to potentially walk away from their master licensee agreement for Super 8 in China, and favoring their own kind of direct franchising in that country. And I wonder, in a broad sense, like, do you see this kind of expansion of outside Western brands franchising efforts in China, like that more direct model? Because obviously for years and years we've seen that kind of local partner relationship be the hinge for that with companies like Hyatt and Wyndham. But is there kind of an evolution of how that's working in the country?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's something you kind of waited for in a while to see if it was going to happen, because from memory, they would have master or franchisees with Super 8 and Days and Howard Johnson. But I mean, they were also early in that sense to try something different back in the day. This is 20 years ago or something that was done, or over 20.
Yeah, over 20 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, as things happen in China, that makes brand grows quickly, but to your point, not within your brand realm and control, if you will. I think the timing, if they were to do it, definitely makes sense given so much more intel and data, what franchising works, where, and China has matured and changed so much in the last couple of decades, right? So all the learnings from all the main Chinese groups and how they brought in and co-worked occasionally then and more with international brands, we know a lot more. And I think these management companies and like which franchisees, like, so instead of going, is it 5-6 tier cities, or are we in 3-4? There was this, after all, the economy that was upper mid-scale and mid-scale, and putting different brands, within, in this case, maybe Super 8, different segments of that, just like you have with Ibis styles, etc. Right? So tiers within these mid-scale and economy brands is something that seems to work really well. That broad approach. China is such a big market where franchising, there was a tough phase in the first 10 years, which, Watu and others learned. by growth and having a supremely metric and analytical way of doing it when it was successful. And I think that was really impressive for some of those companies, and Jinjiang and BTG as well. So I think when we start seeing, I think the franchise model is always going to grow and be very, very strong in China because it came up so late and they had learnings from other countries, and now they have their own learnings. So it's going to be interesting to see how that grows outside the big cities predominantly as well. So yeah, it's an interesting movement if that comes through.
So time to talk about what we always want to talk about from month to month, although today probably a little less enthusiastic than usual. Another moment of transparency for our listeners. I was explaining to Jesper before we started recording how when I woke up, the Swans were up big. Then I drove into work and the Swans were down big, and that's how the game ended. So how are you feeling footy wise, Jesper? Our beloved Sydney Swans, all whatever little bit of postseason hope we had was dashed this morning. How you holding up?
Yeah, it really was. This was the last one that just came through. And I mean, when you look at the ladder a couple of weeks ago, people who know much more than you and I said, like, well, that race is over because you look at the calendar, what's left in the fixtures for sure. But then they won 6 out of 7 or something, right? And it was getting there, but we knew that both playing Giants, as was now, and then Lions as well coming up, they are just much better teams this year. So it was nice to get a run. And
it was a fun moment in time, right? Like everybody says, like it's not gonna happen, but mathematically you're not out of it. And like, hey, run with that as long as you can.
Yeah, we got some key players back, right? That was nice. But I think Swans were up 50-23 at one stage today.
Which is when I checked the score this morning.
And then they dropped, and lost by almost half. Like what was it, 50-120 or something? It was. I stopped because no, but we got a couple of. It was nice to beat North Melbourne, to your dear colleague, but we and I think I look forward to the playoffs though, because you have a couple of teams, and it's like 2 or 3 teams that really are in the mix there. They play really good footy. So it's going to be one of those years from the sidelines for sure in the final 8. But it's still a good game. And if people are frustrated with that, it was harder for me watching the Sweden's ladies crash out in the Euros against England. That always hurts.
Well, because
I tend to support anyone but England, but
please do know that we've been hearing about that game from my colleague Terry Baker quite a bit since that happened.
Well, I'm glad I didn't speak to him, because that would have been too painful, because we should have won that game. But that's okay. Right. So we'll have to check through that. All
right, Jesper. Well, another interesting month. Hopefully better sporting news when we connect next month.
Agree. Thanks so much, Sean. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Davon Reed.
I'm Omari Head.
And I'm Chris Henry.
We're the hosts of the Next Gen and Lodging podcast. It's a monthly show in which we interview a new generation of hoteliers to get their insights into a variety of disciplines and topics, from finance to food and beverage and hotel operations. Listen to us on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode of the CoStar News Hotels podcast was recorded on July 25th, 2025, and edited by me, Sean McCracken. Go to costar.com/hotel news for more from us, and make sure to subscribe to, rate, and review all of our podcasts, including Tell Me More, Next Gen Lodging, and The Upgrade on your podcast platform of choice.